welcome back to Mrs. B Reads. We are working on Linda Sue Park's A Long Walk to Water, and this is period 1. Hi. Aren't they cute? All right. So, we were talking about where we left off with Naya. Those two men drove up in the Jeep, and they had tea with the village elders, and they were talking about water, and Naya's like, the pond is over there. What the heck? So the men we're talking about the men again. Here we go. We're on page 57, chapter 10. Southern Sudan, 2008. The men finished their meeting. They all stood and walked past Naya's house. Naya joined the crowd of children following them. A few minutes walk beyond her house, there was a tree. The men stopped at the tree, and the strangers talked to Naya's uncle some more. There was another tree some 50 paces past the first one. With Naya's uncle beside him, one of the men stopped at the halfway point. The other man walked the rest of the way and examined the second tree. The first man called out to his friend in a language Naya did not understand. The friend answered in the same language, but as he walked back toward the group, he translated for the chief, and Naya could hear him. This is the spot, halfway between the two largest trees. We will find water here. Naya shook her head. What were they talking about? She knew that place like the back of her own hand. It was there, between the two trees, that the village sometimes gathered to sing and talk around a big fire. There wasn't a single drop of water on that spot, unless it was raining. Interesting, right? Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva reached for his gourd. He knew it to be half full, but suddenly it felt much lighter, as if there was hardly any water left in it. Uncle Jawir must have guessed what he was thinking. No, Salva, he murmured. You are too small and not strong enough yet. All right. What's happening with Salva? Do you remember where we left off? Hello? What's going on?
One of the women were giving water to one of the men that were lying on the ground.
So they were walking across the desert, and they found a group of 9 men lying on the ground, and one of the women in Salva's group went to give one of the men on the ground some water. And we had this whole conversation about, would you give up your water at that point to these people who were dying, right? Yes.
I feel bad for those people.
Yes, of course. We should feel very bad for those people. Okay. You are too small and not strong enough yet. Without water, you will not survive the rest of the walk. Some of the others, they will be able to manage better than you. Sure enough, there were now 3 women giving water to the men on the ground. Like a miracle, the small amounts of water revived them. They were able to stagger to their feet and join the group as the walking continued. But their 5 dead companions were left behind. Oof. There were no tools with which to dig, and besides, burying the dead men would have taken too much time. Salva tried not to look as he walked past the bodies, but his eyes were drawn in their direction. He knew what would happen. Brace yourself. Vultures would find the bodies and strip them of their rotting flesh until only the bones remained. He felt sick at the thought of those men, first dying in such a horrible way, and then having even their corpses ravaged. What do you think ravaged means? What do you think ravaged means? Any ideas? Put it in the context of that sentence. What do you think? You two are on Silent Island. What do you think? Yes, destroyed. Nice job. If he were older and stronger, would he have given water to those men? Or would he, like most of the group, have kept his water for himself? What would you do? It was the group's 3rd day in the desert. By sunset, they would be out of the desert, and after that, it would not be far to the Etang refugee camp in Ethiopia. Do you know what a refugee camp is, by the way? Do you know? Raise your hand if you know what a refugee camp is. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go look up pictures of refugee camps in a bit. People who are playing along at home, go and look one up right now so you have an understanding of where they're going. I don't want you to think it's like camping, like we think of camping, with like s'mores by the fireplace and tents and games and swimming in a lake, all right? Quite different than that, okay? Okay. Etang refugee camp in Ethiopia. As they trudged through the heat, Salva finally had a chance to talk to Uncle about a worry that had been growing like a long shadow across his thoughts. Uncle, if I'm in Ethiopia, how will my parents ever find me? When will I be able to go back to Luanarik? I have talked to the others here, Uncle said. We believe that the village of Luanarik was attacked and probably burned. Your family... Uncle paused and looked away. When he looked back again, his face was solemn. What is he not saying? What probably happened to Salva's family? Yeah, they were probably destroyed. I know. Salva, few people survived the attack on the village. Anyone still alive would have fled into the bush, and no one knows where they are now. Salva was silent for a moment. Then he said, "At least you will be there with me in Ethiopia." Uncle's voice was gentle. "No, Salva. I am going to take you to the refugee camp, but then I will return to Sudan to fight in the war." Salva stopped walking and clutched at Uncle's arm. "But, Uncle, I will have no one. Who will be my family?" Uncle gently loosened Salva's grip so he could take the boy's hand in his. "There will be many other people in the camp. You will become friends with some of them. You will make a kind of family there. They too will need people they can depend on." Salva shook his head, unable to imagine what life would be like in the camp without Uncle. He squeezed Uncle's hand tightly. Uncle stood quietly and said nothing more. "He knows it will be hard for me," Salva realized. "He does not want to leave me there, but he has to go back and fight for our people. I mustn't act like a baby. I must try to be strong." Salva swallowed hard. "Uncle, when you go back to Sudan, you might meet my parents somewhere. You could tell them where I am, or you could talk to those you meet and ask where the people of Luanarik are now." Uncle did not answer right away, and then he said, "Of course I will do that, nephew." Salva felt a tiny spark of hope. With Uncle looking for his family, there was a chance they might all be together again one day. No one in the group had eaten anything for 2 days. Oh my God, you guys, can you imagine not eating for 2 days?
Yeah.
Oh, yikes. I'm starving by lunchtime. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
Their water was nearly gone. Only the vision of leaving the desert kept them moving through the heat and the dust. Early that afternoon, they came across the first evidence that the desert was receding. What does receding mean? Who haven't I heard from yet? What does receding mean? Going away. Nice job. A few stunted trees near a shallow pool of muddy water. The water was unfit to drink, but a dead stork lay by the pond's edge. Immediately, the group began to make preparations to cook and eat the bird. Salva helped gather twigs for the fire. I know. As the bird roasted, Salva could hardly keep his eyes off it. There would only be enough for a bite or two for each person, but he could hardly wait. Then he heard loud voices. Along with the rest of the group, he turned and saw 6 men coming toward them. As the men approached, he could see that they were armed with guns and machetes. Do you know what a machete is? Big, long knife. Okay. The men began shouting, "Sit down! Hands on your heads! All of you, now!" Everyone in the group sat down at once. Salva was afraid of the weapons, and he could see that the others were too. One of the men walked among the group and stopped in front of Uncle. Salva could tell by the ritual scarring on the man's face that he was from the Nuer tribe. So do you remember when I showed you the pictures of the Dinka, the ritual scarring that was like in the shape of the V on the forehead? Remember? Okay, so the Nuer tribe also has scars, but they're in a different pattern. And we talked about how people could then visually recognize who was in their tribe and who wasn't, so who is safe and who isn't. Remember, the Dinka and the Nuer are what? Enemies, right? "Are you with the rebels?" the man asked. "No," Uncle answered. "Where have you come from? Where are you going?" "We come from the west of the Nile," Uncle said. "We are going to Etang, to the refugee camp." The man told Uncle to get up and leave his gun where it was. 2 of the other men took Uncle to a tree several yards away and tied him to it. Oh. Then the men moved among the group. If anyone was carrying a bag, the men opened it and took whatever was in it. They ordered some people to remove their clothing and took that too. Salva was trembling. Even in the midst of his fear, he realized that for the first time on the trip, it was a good thing to be the youngest and smallest. The men would not be interested in his clothes. When the men had finished their looting, they picked up Uncle's gun. Then they walked to the tree where Uncle was tied up. Maybe they will leave us alone now that they have robbed us, Salva thought. He heard them laughing. As Salva watched, one of the men aimed his gun at Uncle. 3 shots rang out. Then the men ran away. Again, I will remind you that this is a true story. Don't forget to like and subscribe.